Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and finally, no longer on assignment, he did not accept to choose the mission, and it self-destructed. He's back. Mr. Brian E. Roach. What's up, Brian?
I'm happy. I'm partying. It's a beautiful time of year.
Yeah, you sound like you're in Sesame Street.
1, 2.
It's like 53 days until first Thursday night's game. Yeah. Something like that. I know it's close. I feel like to throw in another analogy or something here, I feel like I'm on the Oregon Trail and I'm just hoping to not die of dysentery getting to football season. It is painful, man. There was like last Saturday, I'm actually sitting at Permane Brothers. I put the painting up on Instagram and social media of this guy. I forgot his name now. His last name's Beach. I wanted to give him a quick shout out. He was talking on Instagram like, hey, that's my portrait. And he had a few other Pittsburgh sports personalities, like Sidney Crosby and stuff like that. But this one was Juju Smith-Schuster standing over top of Vontaze Burfict. And it was awesome. It's an awesome, I don't know if it's a drawing or drawing or a painting or what it is, but it's a piece of art. And it is a beautiful piece of art. It should be up for auction. But anyways, I'm sitting there. And the reason I noticed this piece of art is because there's stuff like a 30 for 30 rerun from like 5 years ago about I don't even know what maybe like horse racing, and then there's like a baseball game on, but it's none of the local teams. It's like a New York team or something I don't care about. Rugby, there's some rugby event that was in San Francisco or something, and it's just like, man, I cannot wait for football to be back. And it's here, finally. But
finally.
Yes, finally. But you know what? Don't have a whole lot to talk about with there being like a day. We'll come back around to the training camp stuff when we get a few more days of practice in to talk about all these things. I'll be there over the weekend, so I'll get to see some of this firsthand. And I was also thinking about this too. Training camp going to be a lot less painful than one of the times I went last year where Landry Jones was hurt and Ben Roethlisberger had a personal day off, so I got to see the throwing talents of not only Josh Dobbs, who's quite talented, but also Bart Houston. So hopefully I will be spared of that with this quarterback controversy / battle, camp battle, whatever it is that'll be occurring, and I seem to fight with everybody on social media about. So I'm happy about that.
Excellent. Yes. I count, as you said, we're counting the days. To me, football season is back. It's here. It's started. I don't care that it's 150,000 degrees outside. I don't care that it's humid and hot. I don't care anymore. It's football season.
It is football season, and hopefully my name doesn't end up on a tombstone before then, because that would be sad. That would be very sad. So, but you know what? We meant to call this show, or initially a pre-camp look at the Baltimore Ravens. They've been in camp for a week already. So, yes. The preseason look at the Baltimore Ravens. We're going to do what we did with the Browns and Bengals, take a look at the depth chart or what kind of depth chart the Ravens had last year. I don't know. How many guys? I had it listed here, like 16 guys. How many guys went on injured reserve? It's loading now, of course. Technology, ever so faithful. Let me see here. 16 players on injured reserve in 2017, and we'll go through that list because, more than half of them weren't going to help this team anyway. Somehow the Ravens crawled to a 9-7 record last year, but still missed the postseason for the third straight season. We talked about this before in an earlier show about which coaches are on the hot seat in the AFC North. We don't think Mike Tomlin is. We always think Marvin Lewis is, and Hugh Jackson, I mean, that's a no-brainer. I don't think his seat cooled off during the winter whatsoever. So John Harbaugh, not Jim Harbaugh, although he's the more annoying brother, I believe. 2015 Baltimore Ravens 5-11, 2016 8-8, and then 9-7 last season. They're second place in the AFC North 2 years in a row, but also dropped games at the very end of the year to really crappy Cincinnati Bengals teams. By which, and I mean the Bengals being crappy by that point of the year too because of injuries. And, I don't know that the Baltimore Ravens are necessarily in position to really turn this around this year either. So let's start taking a look at some of the positions. We're going to start with the offense, and let's go with Captain Obvious right here. Last year, I don't think the Ravens had a very strong wide receiver core. They had one of their top draft picks from 2015, Brashad Perriman, who didn't really do anything again and appears by all intents and purposes to be a busting on his way out if he even gets through camp this season. Mike Wallace, who's left and gone to the Philadelphia Eagles. Jeremy Maclin, who's still a free agent. He was picked up on one of those one-year loaner type deals. So one of their more, consistent guys was somebody named Chris Moore. And he's still there, but they have supplemented this with this wide receiver core, which was not very strong last year. And, of course, only one of their top 5 receivers returning this year, who is a backup running back in Buck Allen. So they have Willie Snead, an aging Michael Crabtree, and I want to say an underwhelming so far wide receiver, formerly of the Arizona Cardinals, John Brown. Compared to last year's really underwhelming crew, would you say they have upgraded or downgraded this season? I'm giving the thumbs down.
Well, it's hard. It's hard to give them any kind of a grade because they were so bad last year. And I look, I don't know what Michael Crabtree has left. So, I could kind of look at Michael Crabtree and Mike Wallace and say that's a push. I don't know if John Brown, who I think has been hurt in the past, is going to be a resurgent guy or a less than resurgent guy. But I knew Jeremy Maclin wasn't going to be because he's always injured.
Man, I love Jeremy Maclin too. It's such a shame, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. But it's true. I mean, the guy has appeared to be a fragile player. Then you've got Willie Snead. Well, I kind of look at Willie Snead as having to be an upgrade on Brashad Perriman because Perriman has been so inconsistent, and when he was consistent, it was consistently not good. That it's hard to say that it's a downgrade in my view, but it's also hard to say this is an upgrade. I'm leaning more towards push with, not that I want to give any hope to any of the purple people eaters out there or whatever they are, flocking dead rat birds. Not that I want to give them any hope, but there's a hope that John Brown might actually be better than Jeremy Maclin was. So maybe they're going to be slightly improved. I don't see it yet, but you never know.
I think the only value John Brown has is to run in a straight line down the field very fast and see if Flacco could get a pass interference call. I didn't care for him much in Arizona. There was always the promise. I always bring up the fantasy football stuff, and it was like when there's a Jerron Brown on the Arizona Cardinals over a John Brown, that's a problem. Yeah, Crabtree, I never viewed Crabtree as a wide receiver 1. He was fine as a 2, maybe, with the Raiders. And when called upon, he had some plays there. That all started to come together with Derek Carr, and, of course, when they drafted Amari Cooper on the other side. His time in San Francisco was pretty mediocre for the most part. I don't know. He just doesn't jump off the page at me. And then when there's Willie Snead, who hit or miss. I mean, here you want to talk about teams. When you talk about the Steelers knowing when to let go of guys, let's talk about the New Orleans Saints. What have any of these receivers that have left the Saints ever done when they've left the Saints? We know of Lance Moore, obviously. Robert Meacham disappeared into the oblivion. I don't even know what happened to guys like Devery Henderson, and I'm missing the big one. What was it, Marquez Colston or whatever eventually fell off the face of the planet too. I mean, they just they know when to cut ties. They know when to move on. And I mean, with the exception of maybe Brandon Cooks playing with Tom Brady last year, I think he still had just kind of for him, probably an average year. We'll see what he does with the Rams. But back on to the Ravens here. Benjamin Watson had 61 receptions last year for 522 yards. He's with the Saints this year. He's gone. Yeah. He was basically their big tight end. And outside of the top 5, the number 6 guy in receptions, Nick Boyle, 28 for 203. I don't know where Nick Boyle, when we get into the tight ends here, in fact, let's just say it because Watson's out. It could be Max Williams or Hayden Hurst, who they're already calling Hayden Hurts because he already got hurt in camp. They're one of those draft picks. And then who was it? Was it Mark Andrews? They took 2 tight ends.
Yes, they did. Mark Andrews. Yeah.
Yes, because Max Williams has not amounted to much. 15 catches for 86 yards last season. That's still better than Brashad Perryman, who only had 10 for 77. These draft picks have not panned out for them. I talked about Chris Moore, 18 for 248. So at least he had a few long receptions or some yak at least. But this was all like running backs. I mean, outside of Mike Wallace's 52 for 748, Macklin had 40 for 440. You have Buck Allen, 46 for 250, which isn't a whole lot of yards at all per reception. And Danny Woodhead, who there's another guy that's snake bitten with injuries, 33 for 200. So, I mean, it's sad. I don't know how else to say it. And you look at the tight ends this year, you would think by going high in the draft on 2 tight end picks, I don't necessarily know that that's going to work out any better. Now, Watson was kind of a guy who fell into that place because of what all transpired with Dennis Pitta. He was just never able to get it back together, and that position has been a sore spot for this offense for some time. But I gotta think here there has to be an upgrade with Hurst and/or Andrews, even over Max Williams, let alone Ben Watson. I'm not going to say Pitta because I don't think he ever materialized into their plans for 2017. I think he ended up retiring very early in the process, if not right around the start of camp. So I'm going to say upgrade here. I don't know that it's a good upgrade. It's going to be a work in progress and see if any of these rookies can pan out.
Yeah, and I knew that there was a receiver I was thinking about on this team that I was missing, and that was Jaleel Scott, who they drafted.
Oh, yeah.
I liked Jaleel Scott. Look, he's going to be a project. He's not a polished product coming out of New Mexico State, but they have at least another guy who can do the elite Joe Flacco special of, as you said, run down the field and draw pass interference. So they did draft a couple wide receivers, but they did it pretty late, 4th and 5th rounds. Now, Hayden Hurts, as you said. Look, when you guys are being drafted to replace or essentially compete with a guy whose biggest claim to fame is getting punked by Vontaze Burfict, that's what everybody remembers Max Williams for, is getting his head nearly decapitated by Vontaze Burfict on a cheap shot, one of his many. And you kind of have to hope they do a better job. I mean, they used a 1st and a 3rd round pick on tight ends. They invested heavily in tight ends, so they better get something out of it more than a guy who's going to be hurt. And we'll see. I wasn't really high on Mark Andrews. I liked Hayden Hurst, but I think he does have potentially that injury bug to deal with. So we'll see. I mean, they're not saying anything. I don't think there's been any official word other than soft tissue injury, which is,
heard.
Another way of saying we aren't going to tell you.
Yeah, pretty much. And the elephant in the room, of course, is the guy throwing the ball to all of these guys. Yes. I mean, what was their record? Aren't they like 41-41 since Joe Flacco won the Super Bowl? Something almost dead even there. And that might not be the exact numbers, so don't hold me to it. But, I mean, this is the reason they went after Lamar Jackson. Now, Flacco was hurt during camp. He had some back issues. He probably played injured last year, but he started every game. He was only sacked 27 times, which is quite amazing considering the patchwork offensive line that we'll talk about next. But his completion percentage, believe it or not, 64.1. Even with those receivers, a lot of dump-off passes that contribute to that. 18 touchdowns to 13 picks. There was like a pick party against them. Jacksonville ate them alive too, so we can't really poke too much fun. But they got shellacked when they went to London last year. And I want to say Jacksonville had like 10 of those sacks or something. They had something ridiculous. They just destroyed Baltimore. But you know what? It's his QB rating as part of all this just last season was 80.4, which is not good, Mr. Joe Flacco. Flacco is thrown in the last, how many seasons? I'm looking at this. He had 20 touchdown passes the prior season in 2016. So he was 20-15, not much better. 14-12 TD to INT ratio. You have to go all the way back to their last playoff season in 2014, where he was 27-12 for his touchdown to interception ratio. Not very solid numbers, and I believe, he's never thrown for 4,000 yards in a season in his entire career, despite all but 2015 playing all 16 games. He's played every single game except for 1 year in 2015 where he only played 10. That was their 3-7 year, of course. Is there any – how do I want to frame this? This is why they went out and got Lamar Jackson, because I think they might see the writing on the wall, and they know they have an out. And they had 12 draft picks. They had an obscene amount of draft picks, and they're still trying to kind of rebuild this thing, because even though they had a winning season, they're not getting over the hump and getting into the playoff race, or they're falling short right at the end. I'm going to say adding Lamar Jackson over Ryan Mallett as a backup is an upgrade. And they have RG3, who for some reason I still have high hopes for if he could stay healthy. But we know that those two quarterbacks are completely different style than Joe Flacco. I'm going to say the quarterback position is upgraded, but it's not going to be much of an upgrade if Flacco is still the starter in 2018, or for the majority of it.
No, we've talked about this once before. Maybe it was around the draft, about that pick of Lamar Jackson. I think, look, they have made a decision on where they're going to go, and it's not going to be in the direction of Joe Flacco down the road. Their $150 million man who has, that's like buying a Mercedes logo on, some old Pinto, apparently. Is what they got for their money, because at best he's been average, and at worst he's been a poor investment, probably a poor investment regardless, considering how much money he's made and how little he's produced since that Super Bowl win. But I remember saying this on an earlier podcast. It's not going to surprise me if Joe Flacco is not the quarterback of the Baltimore Ravens at a very early point in the season if he comes out and stalls. Now, that being said, I don't think that they're in a position where Lamar Jackson can succeed yet either, unless they're going to try and use him as an all-purpose weapon and focus more on his ability to improvise than actually run plays, because they just don't have the weapons to surround him right now. But they may be willing to take that as a lost year and say, hey, next year we're going to get some draft picks again and try and rebuild. But they'll never. I don't think they're going to say this. I shouldn't say never, but I don't think they are. I look at this team as rebuilding, at least on the offensive side, in full rebuild mode, because they just don't have the weapons. They don't have the talent there, and Flacco's just not that good. He's not elite. We all know that. I will not surprise me if Lamar Jackson is not the quarterback well before the end of the year, and that they part ways with Joe Flacco at the end of this season.
Yeah. Just to add and interject here, we didn't mention who Lamar Jackson is for the unknowing. Number one, first-round draft pick invested in him. Former Heisman Trophy winner, and a guy that is a very mobile quarterback at the college level, put up a lot of all-purpose yards, threw a lot of touchdown passes, and also ran for a lot. That's the reason why Brian is saying that maybe this offense is in a rebuilding mode, because that's completely the polar opposite of Mr. Statue Joe Flacco.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
it's nowhere near the same. You're talking about a completely different dynamic on offense. And look, we haven't really touched on the running backs yet, but Terrence West, Alex Collins, and Javorius Buck Allen, those are not three guys that fit this offense either. This change of offense, really. The receivers don't. The tight ends don't. You've got one piece, that's the quarterback, and look, quite frankly, the offensive line doesn't. You've got a project to turn this into an offense that works with Lamar Jackson's skill set.
Yeah, speaking of the backs, you mentioned Terrence West, who was the penciled-in starter. They've been hodgepodge with this. They haven't really drafted guys. They still really haven't found any successor since Ray Rice was booted from the league, pretty much. Bernard Pierce was supposed to be that guy, and I think he had fumble problems, and then his yards per carry were not good. And eventually they bumped around and found West. Well, West is with the New Orleans Saints now, so another guy that leaves. Apparently, one man's trash is another man's treasure. But New Orleans needs some guys since Ingram's suspended for a few games to start the season, so they're going to supplement Kamara. I don't think they could run the wheels off Kamara like we do with Le'Veon Bell. But I think they found a guy. They had this zone running thing that they were trying with Alex Collins, and he nearly had 1,000 yards, and he wasn't the starter at the beginning of the season by all means. And, he still split some time. Buck Allen still. These guys split some time. This is another one of these committee-type things when we were talking about the whole can you replace Bell. The Ravens have this. They almost had a 1,000-yard rusher. Collins could be a 1,000-yard rusher this season. Buck Allen, like I said, the only guy in the top 5 coming back that catches some passes. Now, he might not get a lot of yards per reception, but he's at least maybe converting some first downs and things of that nature. So there's still value to him. I don't know. The running backs, I'm going to say, are better just because they figured out that Collins might be their guy, but they don't have a whole lot maybe to fall back on if Collins doesn't end up being that guy. And like you said, it's kind of the rebuild mode. The fullbacks have changed too. They had Lorenzo Taliaferro, and now they have Patrick Ricard, who was an undrafted free agent last season. Running back, fullback, I don't know. That might be a push. I know Taliaferro caught some passes, but you know what? I don't know. It's hard to say because you don't know what this offense is going to look like. You don't know if they're going to throw a fullback or use this Ricard as like kind of the H-back, kind of like what we're talking about with like Samuels. How many snaps do you put a guy out there like that? You're not running out there with an I formation or an offset I for half the game, especially when you have Willie Snead, Michael Crabtree, and John Brown, and you have 2 rookie tight ends. You have the guy who was pretty much the starter and Nick Boyle, and you still have Max Williams. You have 4 tight ends. So I don't necessarily see them going, unless they throw 3 tight ends out there and a fullback for some reason. I don't know, man. Although those numbers don't really add up either. So for the running backs, I'm going to say they're just okay as a push there. And just to kind of jump over, since you already mentioned a little bit with their running backs, their offensive line is somewhat different. I'm not going to say entirely different, but Marshall Yanda, who they lost early on, that's a big difference getting that guy back. He's going to be the right guard. Matt Skura, who was like their 3rd center, filled in for Yanda. He's an undrafted guy too. Think BJ Finney. He's going to be the center this year because Ryan Jensen left town. He was their starter at center, and he left town and got a big deal, and I'm trying to think where he went. I have it somewhere listed in the notes, and I'll pull it up in a second. He's out of town there too, so you got to change at center. You got to change on the right side of the line because they drafted Orlando Brown, who should be the starter at right tackle. Ronnie Stanley was their 1st-round draft pick a year or 2 ago at left tackle. And then they also returned the same left guard in James Hurst. So it's a push at center because I don't know how this Skura is going to be as their starting center over Jensen. But you have to think if Orlando Brown makes the jump at tackle on the one edge next to Marshall Yanda, the offensive line should be better.
Yeah, the thing is with Orlando Brown, as we've talked about when we talked about this guy pre-draft, is on tape. His college tape looks pretty decent. He looks like a talented guy. But that performance at the Combine was just stunning. You expect way more than what you got there. And, you've seen really talented guys at the college level who look like these are surefire guys in the pros. They're going to have nice long careers. They get drafted. or heck, they just finished college and maybe they don't have the desire to play the game. Maybe maybe it's all means to an end. They're looking for that one payday and they're done. I don't know. And I'm not saying any of that is true of Orlando Brown, but you just have to question any kind of dedication when the most important job interview of your life, you essentially tank worse than anything that I could think of as a comparison. Because I can't come up with anything. It was so bad. You just can't help but say that's a question mark. I know that he's going to be penciled in as the starter there, but it's a question mark, and it's a question mark at right tackle, which, while it may not be, the blind side, so to speak, it still is a place where they're going to face some decent, athletic rushers, and we're going to have to see what happens with that. Unless they move to the mobile quarterback, earlier, Lamar Jackson, I don't think so. That could pose some sackages could happen to Mr. Flacco coming off that right side. Even though he'll have a chance to see him, he's not that fleet of foot. We'll have to see.
But he does get rid of the ball. He was only sacked 27 times. He's smart enough to release it, unlike Andy Dalton. So
right. Well, unless it's fourth down and the end of the game.
Yes, we're never going to let that go.
Fourth down, and I'm just going to throw it away. Yeah, it just boggles my mind, and it will always do that. Okay, so I kind of agree with you. I still think that this could be either a push or a slight upgrade. Having Marshall Yanda back is because he was injured last year. So that's an upgrade in and of itself. Ronnie Stanley in his second year should be an upgrade over Ronnie Stanley in his first year. Having some consistency with at least three of these guys being guys who have at least played together somewhat, that's a good thing. So I can see the offensive line being a slight improvement from where it was. But again, your quarterback of the line, so to speak, is a new guy at center. So we have to wait and see.
Yeah, in their top four picks, they had 2 first-round picks. It's where they took Hayden Hurst, 25th overall, moved back into the first round at the bottom at 32 to get Lamar Jackson. And then they didn't have a second-round pick despite having 12 total picks. This is where they found Orlando Brown in the third round, and it reminds me of like Mason Rudolph, except for Mason Rudolph didn't have a bad interview. People just, for whatever reason, they just kept moving on and over after you had the deluge of 5 quarterbacks going in the first round of the draft this year. And then, of course, Mark Andrews was another third-round pick. And then they went back to defense. They took like 2 wide receivers and then some one late-round offensive tackle and a center in the 6th round. So we don't necessarily know how those guys are going to pan out. You just never know. But just looking at it on paper, their offense overall, I don't know. I can't see it overall being too much better. For me, it's going to be all about ball possession, running the football, setting up the play action where Flacco could go deep, and letting your specialists control everything, of which they have 2 good ones. They both return. Sam Cook, the punter, and Justin Tucker, who lost his Pro Bowl status to the Wizard of Boz this season. So that tells you how great Boswell has been. So at least in that regard, it should be okay. Now, the defense has never really, skipped a beat here, even though I was ready to pronounce the doom and gloom last year with the injuries and whatnot. They get some of these guys that were hurt back that are going to fill back in. Terrell Suggs is a year older. He's kind of, their pass rush specialist. They still have Brandon Williams on the line, same nose tackle with Michael Pierce. Brent Urban, one of the defensive ends, comes back to take his starting roll back, presumably. All of that looks looks good on paper. CJ Mosley is back. They signed a guy, Patrick on Wasser. I don't know that I have his name right, but the guy who played most of the snaps as their will linebacker, Kamale Carrera, last year, he's there still too. He's in the mix. Matt Judon, who got a bunch of sacks and really threw off our TJ Watt / Bud Dupree coverage coverage, snap, and sack totals. This guy was kind of off the charts last year, but the guy who was supposed to have that job and got hurt, Albert McClellan, is back too. So even from a depth standpoint, you still have Tim Williams, who they took from Alabama in the third round last year. You have Carl Davis, who's been there and has been pretty solid on the line. I think their front seven, just taking it as a whole group, they not only have the guys that are coming back from being injured, but you have the guys who gained some starting experience, and that creates some depth. That's also going to help their special teams if these guys play on special teams too. This is definitely, I'm not going to say improved group, but they're going to be at least as good as they were last year and shouldn't have any worries with injury concerns.
Yeah, a lot of it will depend on a couple things. Jimmy Smith's coming back.
Wait a minute. I didn't get into the secondary yet.
I know, but that's going to help. I'm jumping ahead. But Jimmy Smith coming back, if he is back, truly, and I think they're being wise. They haven't really let him do much participation yet in camp. They're taking it easy to make sure he's fully recovered. But this is a guy who's missed 17 games in the last 4 years. So he has, he can miss a lot of time. And if he gets hurt again, then I feel like, it's questionable because, look, Terrell Suggs at some point, unless he's James Harrison in disguise, will drop off at some point. I like C.J. Mosley. I think that's they're solid there. The rest of the defensive line, look, it's not the same Ravens defensive line that we are used to seeing. Not anymore. It's been rebuilt to a certain extent. And while I don't think it's necessarily bad, I don't think it's the same dominant line that we once were used to when, the guy who broke Ben's nose was there. I can't remember his name. Marshall Yanda.
No, that's the offensive line. It was Haloti Nada.
Haloti Nada. Yeah, Haloti Nada. Yanda Nada, same damn thing.
Yeah.
So, it's I don't think this is going to be a bad defensive unit. I think that they may be as good as they were last year. I don't expect them to jump up and perform tons better. But they do have, since I already started talking about the defensive backs.
Yeah, go there.
I'm looking at a guy, Stanley Jean-Baptiste, who is a cornerback for them. There's a guy I think could start to make his name much more well-known.
I mean, you jumped right into that, but I mean, look at the guys they got at safety already. You got Eric Weddle, you got Tony Jefferson. They basically stole the formerly San Diego Chargers safeties, and then you got Brandon Carr, who they brought over from Dallas, and he was solid. If Jimmy Smith returns, great. If not, they drafted Marlon Humphrey, and then of course their nickel corner, who was like what was he, 4th round draft pick in 2016. He was hurt in camp last year. He was one of the guys that got hurt too. Tavon Young was actually quite the pleasant surprise when he played in 2016. So I don't know that they have as many concerns here. And then I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, Ladarius Webb still isn't signed to my knowledge, and you never know if they could just pull one of these guys, off the couch like a Brett Kiesel or somebody like that, break glass in case of emergency. So yeah, I think the defense is more than formidable. That could help the offense, but if the offense sputters, man, these guys, I don't know. I mean, it's tough to say because you know what? A few of them are starting to get there up in the age. And, they've been rebuilding it. I mean, just face it. What was it? Back in the day, I mean, they had to replace Ed Reed, which they didn't do. They did okay getting Mosley in place of Ray Lewis. You had Haloti Nada, who they traded away. You had Paul Kruger as one of their defensive ends. They ended up getting, trying to think, Elvis Dumerville off a botch from the Denver Broncos and their paperwork there. But then, he was gone last season too. So it's not quite the intimidating group that it used to be. They lost overall. I mentioned Ryan Jensen, their center. They lost to the Bucs. Mike Wallace has gone to the Eagles. Benjamin Watson gone. Terrence West gone. Michael Campanaro, I don't know that he really amounts to much. They really only brought in John Brown and Michael Crabtree, and of course Willie Snead. They brought back, Brent Urban, of course, they brought back. So re-signing him, I can't see any reason why he's not going to be in contention to start. James Hurst, who is the left guard. Those are the two guys they really grabbed in free agency. You see some of the names they lost. I mentioned Ladarius Webb, Danny Woodhead. He wasn't really around. Ryan Mallett, that experiment's done. Crockett Gilmore, one of the many tight ends that they had to plug and play. And I had Brandon Boykin listed here, who's one of the top guys. I had alphabetical order of the ones that were on IR. None of these guys, I don't think. Brandon Boykin, Bam Bradley, maybe Kenneth Dixon. He was kind of in the mix as one of the running backs previous year. Crockett Gilmore, because he was hurt. That's why he wasn't brought back. But they had other tight ends. Jalen Hill, I don't really know. One of the backup centers, I can't pronounce his name. I'm not even going to say it. Alex Lewis, a guard. McClellan was one of the starters. He was one of the starting linebackers, so that hurt. They still have Nico Saragusa there. I think that's Tony's kid or nephew or whatever. He got the rub. But he's a backup offensive lineman anyway. Jimmy Smith, that was a big one. Brent Urban, as I mentioned, a big one. And then a few others here. Marshall Yanda, probably the biggest one, and Tavon Young. So when you look at 16 and you say the Ravens had all these guys that were hurt, and that's the excuse you make for them having a down year in 2017, although 9-7, I can't really say is much of a down year. Just missing the playoffs is probably the disappointment there. None of these guys that got hurt were, I think, that big of an impact overall, maybe outside of Yanda and one or two of the defenders. Injuries are going to be part of the game. You're going to have guys you're going to need to replace. And, the Steelers had to do it with Ryan Shazier in the past. They've lost guys like Marquise Pouncey. These type of things happen. I don't think when you say 16 guys, who cares? Really, 3 or 4 of them really, role players of some sort. Maybe 2 of them really critical to this team. So I can't see them being much more than a 500 or just above 500 team. If this defense stays together and they put up at least something that resembles an offense, they'll be okay. If they don't, they're in danger of falling all the way to the basement in the AFC North because, as we've said, I think the Bengals are going to be somewhat improved. And the Browns, you got to improve on 0-16. We believe that the Browns could at least take the Ravens once in the head-to-head series. They could probably take all the teams in the AFC North, even including us, head-to-head and pick up a few wins. So back to the original statement of who's on the hot seat here, Joe Flacco and John Harbaugh. You imagine if they get swept by the Browns or even the Bengals, and you got Lamar Jackson sitting there. That's going to be a narrative throughout all of this preseason, and it's going to start really rearing its ugly head if they start like 0-2 or like 1-2. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting year for the Baltimore Ravens, to say the least.
Yeah, and I just want to say one more thing about the defense. We saw in that Jacksonville game last year what happens when that defense has to be pushed too far. If the offense can't keep them at least somewhat rested, they're gonna be exposed because while they're a solid unit, they're a solid unit provided they don't have to play 40 minutes out of the game, and that would be true of most defenses, but. Jacksonville literally just tore them apart thanks to, Flacco's inability to keep the ball within his own receiver's hands or his own hands, to be honest. But that's what you will get out of this defense if that offense is as weak as it has been.
Oh, yeah. Look, Jacksonville laid 44 on them. The first game with the Steelers put 26 on them. The Raiders didn't do much. The Raiders at that point weren't much of a competition. They lost an OT to the Bears, too. You see a common link here? Jaguars, Bears. Another playoff team they lost to, the Vikings. They lost to another playoff team, Tennessee. That was only a 3-point game there. They ended up beating up the hurt Packers, Texans. They actually came out of nowhere and destroyed the Lions 44-20. That's kind of embarrassing. You got the Chris Boswell field goal game back with the Steelers again. Okay, they beat the Browns. They beat a lowly Colts team. And then I referenced it earlier. The last game of the year, they lose to the Bengals 31-27. Still, even with having no one on that offensive line with the Bengals, that defense, they still couldn't come through because they didn't have anything with the offense. More or less the same as what you're saying. This is going to be the Ravens 2018, I think.
Yeah, I agree with your assessment in the sense that there may be a 500 team at best. and they could be a lot worse. It will bring joy to my heart to see them get swept by the Browns. It would bring great happiness to see them go 0-6 in the division.
It would.
You know, I admit it. I'm not being petty. I hope that they lose. But,
yes. I feel you.
That's just the way it is.
I feel you. I'm just hoping the Crabtree isn't. I think that that last Super Bowl Ravens team was really Anquan Bolden was the anchor there on the offense, and I'm hoping Crabtree isn't that anchor. Or there could be a little bit of trouble, but still, I don't think any of these guys are Ray Rice. I still don't think they have all the other pieces together. They don't have I don't know, Torrey Smith. You just throw the ball to, I guess, John Brown. Just let him run in a straight line down the field. Perryman, it wouldn't matter because, I mean, he's not going to get a call, I don't think. He's just – I don't know. I still don't know about that. But you know what? Next week, we will arrive in the helicopter to Stone Cold Steve Austin music, just like Antonio Brown and Vince Williams did for camp. We'll have some camp things. I'll get to see some stuff with my own eyes. I'll be able to tell you everything else I didn't see with my own eyes, with everyone else's eyes and ears on the ground at St. Vincent's College as camp gets underway. 11 of the first 12 days, the Steelers will be practicing. It's going to be a grind, and we'll have a lot to talk about. So, Brian, thanks once again. It's good to have you back, buddy. Don't go missing on me anymore.
Absolutely. It's always good to be back. Make sure you rub James Conner's mullet for luck.
Oh, I don't know. It might get me thrown out. I'm jealous. I can't grow any hair. I have a bald head, so I can't make fun of a mullet when the most hair I have is coming out of my nose and ears. That sucks.
That's TMI, man. That's TMI.
It sucks getting old. So on that note, we'll leave you off. Don't forget about #HelmetWorthy over on the website. All the other fun things we got going on. Till next time, folks. My name's Joe. His name's Brian. Be safe. Be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.